All right, welcome back everybody to a episode of the Bracket Busters podcast. I am Elliot Crow here, and it's been a hot minute since we've done one of these things. Kind of got out of the rhythm of this a little bit here, but I got Isaac Bourne joining me today, and I just thought, Isaac, you've been traveling a lot, so why don't you kind of talk about what all you've been doing lately?
Well, this past weekend it was a long one. I started off my weekend on Friday at the OVC semifinals. Got to watch SIU Edwardsville in the nightcap. They took down Tennessee State, but then before that it was SEMO versus Little Rock. Really thought the Trojans were going to put up a bit of a fight. Didn't really do that, and SIUE was able to come out on top against the Tennessee State team on a very weird play to finish off the game for the Tigers. If you guys watched that semifinal game, it was a bit of a weird play. Tennessee State didn't even really get a shot up, but then I went to Evansville the night after that to go watch the final of that one. I really thought that SEMO versus SIUE was going to be a close one, but you could tell that the Cougars really had just smelled blood in the water, and I mean, they went after it. Coach Baroni, congrats to him. I mean, he's one of the best in the OVC, and I would not be surprised if he got a really nice job this year or the year after that with another program, a much higher level program. But then, the night after that, because we sleep in May, I was in St. Louis for Drake versus Bradley during Arch Madness, and that was a really fun game. I think if anyone listening wants to go to a mid-major conference tournament with probably the best fan experience to date, I don't think it gets much better than Arch Madness. When I was at that game, I just remember you're around a bunch of people that love their teams, and I honestly think that the entire city of Peoria, Illinois, was there to support Bradley. That entire half of the arena was insane. You could tell Drake fans were kind of used to it at that point, but I mean, you saw what happened. Bennett Sturts did what Bennett Sturts does. He dished the ball out, but then when they had to go to other players, Bennett Sturts came alive. Anytime he got any open shots, it was bottoms for him that night, and 20 points for him, and just a great performance by the Bulldogs. I will say it was really, really upsetting watching the Bradley press conference after Coach Wardle and then Duke Dean and Darius Hannah just visibly emotional after what was an incredible season for the Braves.
Yeah, I endorse Arch Madness being one of the best conference tournaments around. I went and saw Bradley. I don't remember who they beat. It's probably about 2021, but I remember going to that. It's just such an incredible environment there. Obviously, I'm a major Missouri Valley supporter, so like always have loved going to the games. Loved it. I was there around when like Creighton was. I remember when Creighton went to Evansville. I went to that game, and teams like Wichita State would come in, and I mean, Missouri Valley's always been incredible. Arch Madness, they're just something that's just so special. And yeah, this year Duke Dean, I wish we could have saw the Duke Dean in the NCAA tournament, but it was sad the way it ended.
I think this year too, just proving that last year we had a record amount of bubble teams, but this year so far, it's really been a record low. Obviously, the bigger conference tournaments that do produce the most bid stealers have not really finished up their tournaments yet. We haven't seen how the AAC shakes up. We haven't seen how, the bigger conference tournaments shake up like the ACC and things like that. But so far from what we've seen a very low amount of bid stealers, which means that we really could see some of those lower bubble teams getting some opportunities.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that regardless of what happens, that we get a two-bid Big West. If UC Irvine happens to knock off UC San Diego, we have to see UC San Diego in the NCAA tournament. Like it is an absolute must. So however the bubble ends up, they got to be on the right side.
I really do think the Tritons are going to be safely in the field. I would be upset if they were not a ten seed or a safe 11 seed that gets a bye. Um, I think it all depends upon that selection committee. And last year we saw that they didn't really favor an Indiana State winning it or getting into the tournament, despite their really high net rating and KenPom rating. But we'll see where UC San Diego finishes. I just don't think that the selection committee, especially after the backlash from last year, leaves them out of the field, even if they lose in their conference tournament.
Yeah, I know their like net's not as high as Indiana State was last year, but I do think that like some of the games in the non-conference favor them a little bit more. Because I mean, they did play San Diego State. I mean, it's not like Drake was kind of there on the question mark or not. Obviously, they don't need the question there anymore, but they could beat Kansas State, they also beat Vanderbilt. UC San Diego doesn't really have like that statement win, but I do think that I think the non-conference does favor them a little bit more than Indiana State did last year. So hopefully we don't see a repeat of that. And so far, it's like you said, the trends aren't really seeing a lot of bid sealers, which is kind of a good thing here. I do think the AAC tournament could produce a bid sealer, but because I think at this point in time they're kind of a one bid. However, how Memphis goes sometimes. Memphis always seems like they're the team that should prevail out of everything, but also North Texas is there, UAB's there. Like we had a lot of competitive teams in that one.
I know we're going to talk about the AAC a little bit later, so I'll leave most of that till then. But I have seen a lot of Memphis fans even talking and trying to convince the team to maybe sit out of the AAC tournament, especially since a loss here, a loss in that tournament definitely could hurt their seeding. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we just go ahead and just kick it off? So we're going to start off with the Conference USA. It is actually starting tonight. One of the games is going on right now at this exact moment. The first two games tonight is UTEP versus Sam Houston, and we also have WKU versus FIU. So the Conference USA has been chaotic this year. We had a lot of teams kind of bounce around first place. Jacksonville State was in first place there for a solid little bit, and then they kind of fell off the map at towards the end of this regular season for them. Quite a few other teams as well. Kennesaw State's been there. New Mexico State's been there. Louisiana Tech was highly regarded by a lot of us that cover mid-major sports earlier in the year, and then they ended up just 9-9 in the conference. So it's been a very ultra competitive conference this year. Like, does any team kind of stand out to you that might be a little bit of a dark horse in this one, who's maybe a little bit lower seeded than maybe what their potential could be?
Also, a quick update on the UTEP Sam Houston game. This might date the podcast a little bit, but 145 left in the game. UTEP's up 73-61. So I'm
Oh,
pretty sure the
wow.
Miners have this one wrapped up. We'll give a quick shout out to Lamar Wilkerson. Incredible season for him. Just
Yeah.
free him. I guess what all I can say. Just a great player on a team that just wasn't very successful. But as far as the rest of Conference USA, I think mid-season it was really surprising me and it was really exciting to watch. But I think once the season went on, you saw those teams that were built to be successful in the long term start to shine. Like, I think Liberty is a great example of that. Liberty, they did really well. They did pretty decently well in non-conference. I think that loss to FAU is probably their lone blemish that I would give them. But the Flames, they started off in Conference USA play. It took them a little bit to get their groove going, and I think that's just how a lot of these teams that come from lower conferences. I think Kennesaw State had the same exact thing. They came from the ASUN. Liberty's in their second season out of the ASUN, but still, the Flames still having to settle into things a little bit more. But now that they're finally settling into things, I mean, the Flames are on a tear right now. They've only lost one game since February 1st, or since that loss to Jacksonville State on February 1st, and it's to Kennesaw State. And they have wins over Jacksonville State and wins over Middle Tennessee. I'm looking at my computer right now, but like this team is coming out at the right time. And I mean, they've got a 37 Ken Palm defense in the nation. This team is built for March. And if I have my money on the Flames, if they make it through this Conference USA tournament to really be a successful team in March, because you do see most of these upset bids coming from teams that can play good defense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the one thing that I was diving into the Ken Palm stats a little bit on each of these teams. The defensive ratings of a lot of these teams in Conference USA is actually wild to me. Like quite a few just defensively stout teams. And, they would say defense wins championships. It's like you said, Liberty kind of started off a little bit rocky in conference play. And I was a little questioning at that point. At that point, I was convinced Louisiana Tech was going to kind of run away with things. But kind of see how that panned out throughout the rest of the conference play. However, even on the offensive end, though, Liberty's pretty stout. I mean, across the board. Like, obviously, they're very good defensively. They still rank 103rd in offensive efficiency. They're ranking 13th at 3-point percent. I mean, there's a lot to like about this Liberty team that bodes well with both the offense and the defensive end. So it's like you said, but my one fear about this conference is it's a one bid. I think the Liberty can go the farthest in the NCAA tournament, but there's nothing stopping them. Because let me look at their route. UTEP's going to win this game, presumably. So Liberty's going to play UTEP next, and then if Liberty were to win that game, play the winner of Kennesaw State and New Mexico State. So like, there's a little bit of a gauntlet because then over on the opposite side of the bracket, you've got Jacksonville State still around that they'll play the winner of tonight's game, WKU FIU. And I love Middle Tennessee. Actually, I thought Middle Tennessee towards the end maybe had potential to kind of bump up to that one seed. They have time for second place with Jacksonville State. They did not have the tiebreaker. So like there's so many teams out there that come out and beat this Liberty team, but I think the Liberty team does have the most potential out of everybody to really truly make a run in the NCAA tournament if their seeding's reasonable enough.
I think Liberty too, just a big testament to coaching. Coach Richie McKay, rightfully so, is getting some national looks. I do think he probably should have won Coach of the Year in the conference if it comes to me, just because Liberty doesn't have the best players in the conference. They've got great players that fit their scheme well. I think they recruited in the offseason perfectly. They don't go to big name Power 5 schools, or they don't go to other mid majors to recruit. They go into D2. They pick up guys like Talon Peter, Javon
Yeah.
Moffmer. They bring in guys, Moffmer, Javon Moffmer from Cedarville. They bring in D2 guys that can make an impact. And Talon Peter is the sixth man of the year in the conference, averaging the most points per game on this team. And it just shows they recruit so well, and they recruit for what they need. And then this year, they needed guys that could score because they lost Kyle Rode in the offseason. And that's exactly what they brought in, and that's exactly what those guys that they brought in have done.
Yeah, and I mean, I could have even told you who Peter was coming into this season. Like, he wasn't on my radar at all. And then now this guy's averaging 13.7 points and 22.2 minutes per game. I mean, that's insane. He had a 30 piece the other day off the bench. I mean, he just kind of came out of nowhere in but that's how you recruit these days is a lot. Like, you're finding talent at the D2, D3, NAIA level, JUCO level. Like, that's what makes good coaches good coaches. And I wouldn't be shocked to see, I know you're a little bit more in tune with the coaching carousel than me, but like I wouldn't be shocked to see his name start to pop around at some other places as well.
Well, I think I'd wait to see on McKay because he does have a contract through for a little bit longer. But I am surprised, like you said, to not see his name on on a coaching carousel because of his ability to coach so well and coach really
Yeah.
good offenses. But I think that'll just a waste to be seen. Once Liberty
Yep.
gets knocked out, maybe he starts to head to that coaching conversation. But I mean, also, how about Jacksonville State? Jerron Pierre coming out of
My
nowhere.
God. That guy.
I had Jacksonville State predicted second to last in this conference coming into the
Oh,
year,
wow.
and then they start going on a tear. I thought that losing Kiki Tandy meant that this team would just be worse than they were last year. I'm going to be honest, I didn't even expect Jerron Pierre to make too much of an impact, but he looked at me and proved me wrong in the biggest way, and I'm happy to be wrong in this situation. He is one of the most dynamic scorers I have seen this entire season.
Yeah, I mean, fourth in the nation in points per game from Jacksonville State. I could not have told you that coming into the season. This is where we're going to be at, what we're going to be talking about at this point in time. Dude shooting 42.7%, nearly 40% from 3-point. I mean, that's this day and age insane. I mean, he's just been all over the place. And what's funny to me about his offensive statistics is like Jacksonville State's not a great offensive team either. Like they rank 134th in offensive efficiency, but for example, they rank 193rd in 3-point percentage. So he's shooting 40%. The rest of the team, he's literally putting the team on his back. He's carried them up to this 2 seed. But that's how it goes, though. It's really crazy how one single individual can really just uplift the entirety of the rest of the team. I mean, we've seen it with other teams. Like Drake's been good overall, but Bennett Sturts has elevated them to a next level. And that's kind of what we're seeing here with Pierre, where it's like the team's solid, but he's just elevating them to a whole other level that we're seeing.
Exactly. And I mean, I think you see that with a lot of teams across this conference. I mean, Kennesaw State, they've got that duo of Cottle and Woolley that I feel like is probably the best guard duo in the conference. I mean, I don't know if we have enough time to talk about every single one of these teams, but I really
Yeah.
could go in depth about every single one of them. Adrian Woolley, I want to talk about him, just to sit on him for just a little bit. I made an outrageous claim on Twitter the other day, or X the other day, that Adrian Woolley might possibly be the greatest freshman in Conference USA history. I got a little bit of
Agreed.
backlash on that, but I'll stand by my point and say most points per game ever by a freshman in the conference history. I think that his freshman season individually is better than Derrick Rose's.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious to see what he does after this season. Obviously, everybody's entering transfer portal right now. So I'm really curious to see what happens there. I think that if he decides to leave, he's going to have an absolute bag of NIL money sitting somewhere. But it's what he has done is seriously absolutely incredible. I mean, Kennesaw State, ever since they kind of got back and started building that program back up, obviously with the great late coach Amir Rahim, but Woolley's just been incredible for them and has had helped them keep that kind of going because there was going to be some question marks after he left as the head coach. So, like, what's the Owls going to do? Are they going to resort back to those really rough times when they were first transitioning up? So, like, I'm happy to see for them, and I love the take, honestly. Like, I know people are going to be like kind of weird about that, but I love the take that Woolley's one of the best because I totally agree with you on that.
And then I think just quickly touching on at Louisiana Tech and Western Kentucky as two teams as well. I feel like a little bit disappointing for both of them. I had Western Kentucky as my favorite to win the conference this year. I think just injuries, but losing Babacar Faye before conference play really, really hurt them. And then with Louisiana Tech, I mean, I don't know. What is your take on them? I really thought, I think it just goes down to a bad season for Bacho compared to last year.
Yeah, I mean, again, I had so much hope for them. They were coming out of non-con. They were 11-2. I know a lot of us that kind of cover mid-major sports. We had them all in our top rankings and everything. They were looking like the team to beat in this conference, and they just fell short. And I agree with you. I think he just didn't have as good of a season as he did. I mean, he still did well. You know, nearly 17 points a game, 6.6 rebounds, shot almost 70%. But I just don't think the other pieces fell around him like they did previously, like last year. And it's kind of a shame because I thought they had the potential to be right up there in the one, two, or three seed possibly, and then obviously they fell 9-9. I still think they could be sneaky though because all it's going to take to win this tournament is 3 games. So really, any team here that we're talking about could come out and kind of surprise us.
I think just losing Isaiah Crawford
Yeah,
to graduation and um, and just their other pieces alongside him really did hurt this team. And I think it hurt them a little bit more than people were going to anticipate. And that's probably what happened. Um, I mean, Middle Tennessee too, a great team. We'll see that'll be a fun matchup coming up later this week.
yeah, I do have to say I've actually caught a couple of games of them live this year. Mostafa is so fun to watch. I love watching that guy. I mean, literally, he's had 30 points and 20 rebound performance against Liberty. And then the game before that, he racked up 18 rebounds. So, like, this guy's a machine on the floor, cleaning up the glass. He's also an offensive weapon as well. I've loved watching him in person, and I'm excited to watch him in this matchup too. Like, I think if I had to pick a dark horse outside of Liberty, like, my pick would be Middle Tennessee because I think they have the potential to make a run in that. I know it's kind of like dead even between them and Jacksonville, I think, behind Liberty, but I think MTSU could be a sneaky one in this one.
That's all I've got for Conference USA. I think New Mexico State's a great team, but we'll waits to be seen where they'll be at.
Yep,
And then
exactly. I still
FIU,
think that New Mexico, yeah, FIU's. I was looking up some stats on them. Side note, their win against who was it? Their win against somebody. Shoot. Oh, I don't remember. Anyway, there was a game where they were playing and they hit 7% of their threes just in that game alone that they upset somebody in the Conference USA. They only won 3 games in Conference USA. I just thought that was an absurd stat that you literally hit 7% of their threes in an entire season in one single game because they won 11 of 22 from that game. So FIU, yeah, not too much there.
yeah, I think Abar is a great player, but just not enough pieces around him. I think
No.
Jaden Brewer also a great scorer. I mean, they've got pieces that I feel like have been built to at some point go to a great team, but in this transfer portal time, it's hard to maintain these guys, and I think they're going to lose a lot of these guys to the portal.
Yeah, and it's really hard when you don't shoot threes in this day and age. It really kills you. And there were 357 at three-point percentage this year, and just overall, just 334th in offensive efficiency. So quite literally one of the worst offensive teams in the country. And a lot of that's because if you can't shoot threes, they're just going to kill you on the perimeter or force you to go inside, and then they're going to stack the inside defensive presence on you. So it's kind of they have it stacked against them, and it's just not a well built out team. There's good players on that team that I think, to your point, it's going to end up going other places and have good careers.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this conversation goes really well into the American Conference as well. If we want to move on
Yeah,
to that.
absolutely. Yeah,
Do you
so
want
who
me
we
to?
got up here first? We got Charlotte and Rice in the first play-in game, and then we got South Florida against Wichita. The winner of Charlotte and Rice will start off against FAU, and then Tulsa and Temple, and UTSA and ECU in the first and second rounds. And you're actually going to this tournament, so who's kind of a team that you're watching out for this one?
Well, I'll be there on Friday for the quarterfinals, so I'll face off against. I'll see the winners of the second round play, and I think out of all the teams in this second round, it really is hard. I want to say that I have the most faith in Wichita State if Temple does not have Jamal Mashburn Jr. I think it all just comes down to if Jamal Mashburn Jr. is healthy, because at this point he is still day to day for the Owls, and I'm sure Coach Fisher would love to have him back. I feel like when he's on the court for this Temple team, they play really, really well. Now it all just comes down to if his healthiness. But I'll go back. I'll come back to them later and talk about this Wichita State team who had, in my opinion, one of the most most the biggest one of the biggest collapses I've seen coming from non-conference to conference play. I had them as one of my top mid-major teams in the nation going into conference play, and then they start out with just a stinker of conference play. The Shockers, they open up conference play against Temple, and then they proceed to lose 7 of their first 8 conference games, and their only win was against the worst team in the conference in Charlotte. And I think it all just goes down to injuries, and they were dealing with injuries. And once they got their players back healthy, and you start to notice them start to pick things up. After that 1-7 period, they went on a 6-game win streak where one of those wins was a win against Memphis at home. You saw that one against Memphis at home in overtime. I think Washington and Xavier Bell
Yep.
are a great duo with Wichita State. And I do feel like if there's one team that's not named the Temple Owls that are healthy, I think Wichita State can really make some noise. They will have to get past Memphis again, and beating Memphis once in a season was hard enough. It'll really tell the story if they can do it twice in a season. But I do think if there's any team that's going to do that, I think Wichita State has a good chance to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I thought Wichita State was dead in the water. I mean, I was the same way. I thought very highly of them, and coming into the season, I thought they were going to be good. But then, really going through their non-con, I was like, oh wow, this team's legitimate. And then all of a sudden, yeah, that they just broke down in at the beginning there of conference play. But really, that Memphis win is what put them back on my radar because I was like, okay, so like now, and then all of a sudden they pop up the winning streak, and I was like, okay, wow, okay, Wichita's back. So I would agree. I think out of the lower seeded teams here, I think Wichita State's by far got the most talent on the team overall. Washington's been incredible. I've loved watching him play. I think out of some of the higher seeds, I I have a favoritism towards North Texas here. I think I just love their defensive presence. They're so fun to watch. I watched them play Evansville at the very beginning of the year, opening. I think that was this first or second game, and just remember seeing. I was like, wow, this team is very talented. Like strong presence on the defensive end. That was at the very beginning of the season. They continue just to improve after that. I mean, what they've done this year is impressive.
Yeah, I really like North Texas. Ross Hodge has done a great job in the portal. This is only his second year since Grant McCaslin left for Texas Tech. But I mean, from last year where they had a really solid team, I didn't think that they could get much better from last year, especially since they were fourth or fifth in the conference last year. They got an NIT bid after a season where they won the NIT. They go into a season where it's just a little bit they start off American Conference in their first season in the American Conference around the middle of the conference, and I thought that was as good as they were going to get for a while. And then they come out this season with a team that looks worse on paper, but Ross Hodge thinks differently.
Yep.
Atten Wright is one of my favorite guards to watch. You saw that 42-pointer he put up the other night. He's an incredible guard. Brendan Lorient, a great bench piece for them. And then Mule Sissoko, we've seen him on this North Texas team for a while now. He
Yeah.
actually was on that team that won the NIT 2 years. But yeah, North Texas just, I mean, you talk about their slow, methodical style of play. I mean, Brennan Lorian, a great bench piece. Mule Sissoko, I talked about him as well. Just seeing his development over the years. Now he's most improved in the American Conference, and I just think it shows how, wow, yes, not Ross Hodge isn't just good at bringing in good players. He's good at developing players. Sissoko was a bench piece last year for them, but now he's a solid starting center for the Mean Green.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And you hit on Wright. I mean, Wright transferred in there was really just an incredible get for him. He's been so. I feel like every game that I watch, it's either him or Laureate that's really just like kind of driving the offense. And you got Sissoko, who's just an absolute monster on the floor. I mean, everything that just pieces very well together there for him. Like, if I had to pick a team, I think that could beat Memphis and become a bid stealer and still win games in the NCAA tournament. I think my team is North Texas out of that because I think UAB, and we can talk about UAB here in a second. I think UAB is really good, but I think North Texas's defense can just absolutely smother teams. We saw it repeatedly during the non-conference. I mean, Minnesota wasn't great, but we saw it in that Minnesota game as well. Like they can beat power schools. So I really wish the AAC was honestly a multi-bid league this year. I wish that like North Texas had kind of like just gotten over the hump a little bit more and kind of elevated their metrics a little bit higher because we easily could have saw probably a two-bid league between Memphis and North Texas this year because North Texas had the talent to do it.
And I think you mentioned it. They're one of the teams to beat Memphis. I think the next thing we talk about really is, the formula to beat Memphis, and that really is what the AAC is. And one thing you notice, and I think this is something I've deduced after watching many of Memphis games, is the Tigers have trouble against teams with good offensive guards. You
Yep.
see UAB struggle against them. They do have Alejandro Vasquez. They do have Butta Johnson. Some nights I feel like he's having a bit of a down year, but Yaxel Lindenborg isn't able to do what he does best because Memphis has one of the best front courts defensively in the nation. They've got Dane Danger, obviously an incredible offensive piece, but he came in as a defensive piece and he's really shown why. They've also got I'm gonna stop really quick. I don't remember his name to save my life. Musa C. They've also got Musa Cisse, another great. I mean, he's one of the. He's a strictly rebounding and defensive guy, and he's done really well at that position as well. Nicholas Jourdain has really come into his own at the three position, and he's not a three. He's really a 4 or 5, but he's now playing a lot in that three position. Sometimes when they want to bring in taller lineups over Colby Rogers.
Yeah, I mean Memphis is so good. I mean, it's going to be really hard for any team to beat Memphis. Obviously, it's happened, and I think other teams can. I think UAB's can stack up well against them. I think North Texas can stack up well against them. But I really actually hope for Memphis fans they get what they need this year because last year was such a down year. It was really just a heartbreaker in how that entire season just went. Obviously, there was the whole it seems like there's always like some type of debacle going on for Memphis. So like what I really hope is like I mean with having Haggerty this year, Memphis has the potential to go in a really deep run in the NCAA tournament this year. And you made this comment earlier on when we are kind of doing the intros and talking about this. Like what I do hope is like I hope they do win the AAC tournament because otherwise I do think it'll hurt their seeding and Memphis really needs every advantage that they can get in the NCAA tournament because I think they have the potential to easily do a Sweet 16 run depending on where they're placed.
I think it all just comes down to coaching. Penny
Yeah,
Hardaway
it
did
does.
coach of the year in the AAC, but I really do think there are still a lot of concerns around him on whether he is the type of coach that he can recruit incredibly well, but when it comes down to X's and O's, can Hardaway coach a team through a tough situation? And a lot of times we've seen this season that sometimes he can. You saw that Arkansas State loss at home as a big example. They were just unable to play themselves out of a slump, and Hardaway not really doing anything to help them. But as they've gone on through the season, you've seen them in some difficult positions, and they've been able to play themselves out of those positions. I think it just all goes down to, I think it was a really weird decision at the time, but now Hardaway, his decision to fire three of his assistant coaches less than a month before the season started, ended up being an incredible decision. I feel like I don't know why, and I don't think anyone is going to know why specifically it was an incredible decision. But nevertheless, those coaches last year they were on the team, and Memphis they weren't very good. They're not on the team this year. He brings an entirely new staff in, and all of a sudden, they have the success that they've needed for so long and they've wanted for so long. And I think that is a big testament to the coaching changes, the culture changes. Nicholas Jourdain's the only player on that team that remains from last season. And even then, he still plays and looks completely different than he did last year.
Yeah, and I think you said it best. I think sometimes you just need a culture change because, there was a lot of drama going around the program. And then the whole thing towards the beginning, obviously, the firing the assistant coaches, there was a thing about DeAndre Williams as well. Like, there was just quite a few things going on in that program at one single time. And it was like, oh man, is Memphis going to be able to overcome this or not? And to your point, though, it's rebuilding the culture and it's adding in the coaching staff. Like last year, okay, for example, I remember watching this game, just pulled their schedule back up. They were almost lost to Rice. They only won by 3 points in that one. That would have been a terrible loss in the resume. Last year, they probably lost that game because this year they had the ability to battle through tough situations. And that's just something that the team last year did not have. I mean, they had several close games here when you look down down their schedule in conference to some teams that, for most power schools would really hurt their resume. And for Memphis, they can't afford those types of losses in the AAC, but they were able to overcome those. And then their only losses were to Temple and Wichita State in overtime. So, that's just something that we would not have seen. I think if you had taken last year's Memphis Tigers team and put it this year, I think the record would be quite a bit lower than what it is now.
And I think what I mentioned at the beginning of the pod, Memphis wanting to drop out of the AAC tournament, it has validity to it. I think
Yeah.
a loss, especially in these earlier rounds, is going to go down as a quad 3, maybe even a quad 4 loss. And especially when you are trying your best to desperately get that 5 seed that they really want, when they're really projected around that 6 or 7 seed line. You can't take a quad 3 loss no matter where it is or when it is, no matter if you're playing the best or worst version of a team. And no matter who they play out of Wichita State or South Florida, that is a quad 3 loss at best. If they lose to them, I obviously don't think they will, but the best case scenario, or the worst case scenario for them is they do pick up a loss. So at this point, they just need to go into Fort Worth with no funny business. They need to just get their work done. And I think the only time that I feel like it's acceptable for them to lose is in that championship game. Like there's nothing that's going to keep them out of the field at this point, but I feel like a loss early on is definitely going to push them up to maybe even a double-digit seed.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. Because I mean, really, and if looking at the championship bracket here, or who they would play in the championship game, most likely North Texas or UAB coming out of that. So if you lose to one of those two teams, if you're going to lose a game, best case scenario, because then that's really not going to be too detrimental. Anything else is going to really just kill them. And it's really a shame. I know you're a mid-major guy, I'm a mid-major guy, and it stinks to see these conferences that obviously have above average teams in them, and you have to fight to be perfect throughout this. And even a team like Memphis literally has to fight to be perfect throughout this. And it's kind of a shame that we have to do that. But obviously you want to hit that 5 mark. But if you lose to North Texas, you lose to a UAB, I would hope you can still survive those and get a respectable seeding that will set you up well for success in the tournament.
You mentioned North Texas in UAB, and I think now is the time for me to mention my favorite that isn't North Texas or UAB, and my favorite to win this tournament, not named Memphis, Texas, or UAB, is a healthy Jamal Mashburn filled Temple Owls team. I feel like Temple started off so well in AAC play that Jamal Mashburn falls with a toe injury. And since then, he's been day-to-day. Coach Fisher tried playing him. It didn't really work out very well for them. They lost to Tulsa that game. And since then, Temple, they had that really long losing streak, but now they've come into their own. They finished the season on a 3-game win streak, and that's all Zion Stanford and Steve Settle. And that's exciting to me because Zion Stanford, a young guy, had to come in the place of Jamal Mashburn Jr., one of the best scorers in the nation. Incredibly big shoes to fill, and he didn't step back at all. I think you saw that in that game winner he hit against South Florida, and since then he's played incredibly well. Steve Settle, another one of those players that came from that Temple team that made it to the finals of the AAC tournament last year. I got to watch that in person, and it was so much fun to watch this Temple team, especially when you saw a guy like Steve Settle, who's 6'10", but maybe not even 200 pounds, go up and shoot threes like one of the best players in the conference. Like those teams, that Temple team last year was fun, but I think this year it has a chance to be even more fun. And it all depends though on Jamal Mashburn's availability, because if they can get Mashburn back with a fully developed Zion Stanford right behind him, man, I really do think that they might be the best team in the conference if they have that guard duo at
Yeah.
full strength.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the record, they were 12-6, 4-1 in the AAC early on, and then even during that losing streak, all the games were close. They only lost one game by double digits. They lost UAB 80-64, but they lost by 6 to Charlotte, 2 to FAU, 6 to Tulsa, 8 to Memphis, and 9 to South Florida in overtime. Like that's all insanely close games. So it's not like they were even getting blown out of the water. I'm not for sure. What game did Mashburn go out in that one during that sequence?
It was against ECU, but then they tried to bring him back against Tulsa, and he didn't.
That's what it was. Yep. Yeah. So you don't even have Mashburn during that stretch, and you're losing all those close games. And then all of a sudden you come back, you win your last three, including a statement win over North Texas in the last game of the year. A lot of this is just about momentum. So if you get him back and you got the momentum coming in for the regular season, you have that mentality that we can beat any team in this conference. That's all you need to do to go on a run in your conference tournament. And they absolutely could do it because they're on the more favorable side of the bracket. So they would end up, if they were going to run, they would end up facing Memphis in the championship game. So even though, yes, they do have a hard path there against North Texas, and then if you had to go up against UAB, it's a tough path, but it's doable because they beat these teams already in conference, and if you get your main guy back.
And that there, and I think it's just all is up to Mashburn's availability. But I think one more team you have to talk about in that second round sequence, you have to talk about ECU, because in my opinion, it's a weird team. ECU, such a
Yeah.
great offensive team. They've got CJ Walker and Felton as such a great duo. And it's so hard to think that this team probably isn't going to go for more than one win.
I know.
And it's hard because they've got two great players, but nothing else around it.
Yeah. It's it's just crazy how like two guys. I mean, when you look at their high points in every single game, it's like Felton, Walker, Felton, Walker. It's every single game. It's those two guys are really like leading the charge for him. And it's not just leading the charge on the points, it's also leading rebounds, leading assists. Like it's actually crazy how those two guys have really just kind of, taken this team. They started 7-1. I know their conference wasn't, or a non-conference schedule wasn't like the best, but they did beat George Mason. And I was like, okay, this team's like really legitimate. And then, then they fell a couple times here, but every single game was pretty close. They lost to North Alabama, that was a close one, lost South Carolina, that was a close one. So like that thing was really a blowout. And then they've had more close losses in conference play. But I think again, kind of coming back to the momentum piece, they did lose the last game of the year really bad, but they did finish winning 6 of the last 8 games. So really, all it kind of takes is getting that momentum coming into this tournament. And all of a sudden, who knows? Felton drops a 40 piece or whatever it is, because I think he's very fully capable of doing that. They could go on a little bit of a miniature run in this tournament.
I think this tournament has, or this conference just has really, really great players. A lot of situations with
It
great
does. Yeah.
and bad teams. You've got UTSA, they've got Primo Spears, an incredible scorer, but he's trapped on the Roadrunners right now.
Yeah.
And then you've also got FAU. I mean, it's a different situation, but FAU's got some great players that I feel like just haven't put it together so far this season. And I'm gonna say sorry to my buddy Robbie LaStella. I'm staying with Robbie when Robbie and I are staying together in an Airbnb when we go to Fort Worth, and he's an FAU guy. But I do feel like it is just the Owls have so many great players and just haven't been able to put them together. And I think there's just a lot of talent in this conference, just sometimes maybe not the best coaching. And so that's why you have to
Yeah.
applaud teams that are very well coached, like North Texas, like Tulane. And then also,
Yes.
I would even credit UAB with that as well. Andy Kennedy is one of the best in the business.
Yeah. I mean, Tulane, we haven't even talked about Tulane, and I feel like Tulane. There were so many times in the season, I'm like, yeah, Tulane could also be like right up there with like the status of like UAB and North Texas and all of them. It's just it's crazy how much talent, to your point, is in this conference because even Rice, not great, but even Rice is like won a few good games here and there. Like it's you go down the list and every team for the most part has at least one what I would consider a good win on their resume. And that's just really impressive. It's kind of see that is where it comes back to. I wish this wasn't a one bid league because really we should see two teams coming out of this. I don't know, we won't. It's a shame, unless of course Memphis loses. But there is an immense amount of talent. That's why I'm jealous if you go into this tournament. I wish you could go to this in person because it's going to be a blast to watch.
I think Charlotte too. They've got Nick Graves and Giancarlo Rosado. That's a great duo, and they're the worst team in the conference, despite
Yeah.
a triple double threat in Rosado, and they've got the top four scorer in the conference in Graves. So I think
Yeah.
it always comes down to just putting things together. I think Jacques for FAU is a great coach. He's just young and needs to be able to bring this team together. And I think they did start to pick things up later in the season. I think Caleb Glenn is a great talent. Actually went to high school in the state of Kentucky. Same with Kiki Tandy, also went to high school about 30 minutes to an hour away from where I went to high school. So FAU, great Kentucky born, Kentucky raised guys. I'm just kidding, but also they've got Bob, a great guy as well. So I mean, Tulane too. Caleb Banks is a great player. I feel like you can
Yeah.
just you can shout out a good player from just about every one of these teams, and it's just going to be really, really fun to watch. And I'm really excited to be there on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that again, this tournament's going to be chaos. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the Conference USA in that where there's just Memphis stands out above everybody else, kind of how Liberty stands out above everybody else, but then there's at least another two, three, four teams that could absolutely win the whole thing. And for this one, Memphis is going to be able to get that second bid. In Conference USA, obviously, you're not going to have a second bid that's coming out of that if Liberty loses. But regardless, two really strong conferences that's going to be incredible tournaments to watch over the course of the next few days.
Exactly. I mean, it'll be. I'm just ready to get there. It'll be fun.
It's the best time of the year. Again, we sleep in May, right? Like it's the best
Exactly.
time of the year for everybody.
Oh, by the way, as we're recording this live, UNC Wilmington up two with 5 seconds on Delaware.
Ooh.
So it would be interesting. I think we talked about this off the pod, but it would be interesting to see if Delaware can somehow come out of this. Be interesting to see two teams with losing records making the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I mean, Delaware, I believe this was the first time a 12 seeds made the CAA championship. I think I heard that correctly. And then obviously it'd be the first time a 12 seeds ever won the CAA championship. So it's absolutely insane what Delaware has done. It looked like Pepperdine was going to maybe do the same thing there for a little bit in the WCC, but they obviously lost to St. Mary's yesterday. But I'm always up for chaos. I want UNC Williamson to win this game because I think the fans are great. I've always loved interacting with the fan base. But what an incredible run by Delaware if they make this. Absolutely insane.
And what a way to go out of the CAA.
Yeah.
You win if you win the conference tournament and then head to, I mean, what we cover, Conference USA. Conference USA is going to have Missouri State and Delaware next year. So it'll be a completely not new look conference, obviously, but they'll have two new teams and just two new teams to add to what already was an insanely competitive conference this year.
Yeah, and I think those are two programs that I think are going to invest more in their basketball. And obviously, they're moving this. Missouri State, obviously moving for football purposes and everything else. Like, I think that having Kunzo Martin coming to Missouri State, I know people are like, didn't know about the hire, but really, if you give these guys NIL, that's all it takes these days to go out and do it. You could, even though I will say this, you can build $1 million roster and it not gel, but if you get good coaches with good track records to come in and build these rosters, I think there's going to be a lot of success, and it just really elevates Conference USA even to another higher bracket. So I'd be curious to see what happens to the AAC as well if somebody like Memphis decides to leave. Like who would try to come in and replace that absence?
Yeah, exactly. I think Conference USA kind of a little bit of a feeder league into the
Yeah,
AAC.
it is.
And I mean, you saw that with was 5 teams 2 years ago leaving, especially after great postseason years. Um, it's weird to see because every team is moved. You see so many teams moving up and not many teams moving down. And at some
Yeah.
point, it's all going to come to a head, and teams are going to have to start making hard decisions. And like the NCAA is going to have to start making some difficult decisions on whether they want to completely reorganize things or not.
Yeah, yeah. It's. I mean, you're seeing the same thing with Pac-12, obviously dismantling quite a few teams out west, and then having that domino effect. The wax in question about whether or not it's even going to exist anymore. Like, I think you're just going to continue to see that, and I don't know. It's going to be an interesting next few years, I think, in terms of realignment and seeing what's going to shake out from all this.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, Isaac, thank you for hopping on and joining tonight. It's been a blast talking about this. I'm excited to see your coverage from the AAC tournament. I've always enjoyed your writing and everything you've been doing over there for MMM. So, like, really great work and super excited to see what you do.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And like you said, if you guys would ever want to check out any of my writing, it'll be just go to Mid Major Madness and you'll see my name somewhere on the website. But then also, I'm Isaac Bourne _ on Twitter or sorry, on X, and then you can catch me there. So that's all I got.
Awesome. Thank you, sir. And to everybody else, thank you for tuning into this, and we'll catch you next time.